I would like to thank the organisers for inviting me to speak today. And I'm just going to describe a series of unplanned events that happened to me that led me to creating some industrial artwork. So I'm going to look at contemporary industrial art, and within that capacity I'm looking at bakeries, pharmaceuticals, health and textiles. So initially artists need inspiration, and an image style I like is one where you get a figure in context, the image must have impact on the viewer, and there must be some documentary value. I also like abstract images, and there are one or two examples of that. So two examples of image style I like, and this is on the left, a postcard from about 1920s of an industrial workshop where we've got a figure on the left in a boiler suit and a tie. So the subject fits well with the background is appropriate to the costume, but it's a very complex image to paint. The photography here is unknown. In contrast, on the right we have a British postage stamp from the Social Reformers series of 1976, designed by David Gentleman, and this commemorates Robert Owen, this particular stamp. David Gentleman was a very prolific artist for the post office in the 1960s and 1970s, sometimes designing single stamps within a set, sometimes designing the whole set. But the beauty of this design is when you see it not singly, but as a complete sheet of stamps. And you can see here how the belts and the rollers are sort of combined to give this sort of magnificent effect. It's very much a design from the 1970s. It has that sort of feel about it. You could buy wallpaper that had a similar sort of look and similar sort of colour palette in the 70s. And I don't think the image would be designed today, but it is quite sort of fascinating. So artists need inspiration. They need to overcome this blank sheet of paper. Where to start? So it's useful to go to galleries, go to classes, have projects, enter competitions, exhibitions, and then sell and move your art on. That's a particularly important one, to move your art on, because it accumulates, I've discovered. So I'm going to deal with each of these in turn. And back in 1983, I visited the City Arts Centre in Edinburgh, where there was an exhibition, a touring exhibition organised by Sheffield City Art Galleries, organised by Yorkshire Arts Association. There were 8 artists presenting their work. They presented maybe up to half a dozen items. And that exhibition toured, and I think the only one in Edinburgh was, only one in Scotland was at the City Arts Centre. So I'm just going to concentrate on Alan Stones, the artist, who visited Cooplands Ltd, the bakery in Doncaster. He spent 2 months working there, making sketches and taking photographs, and then went back to his studio to create the artwork, and probably spent the rest of the year doing that. His work stood out. His work was the only work that I remembered almost 40 years later. And so this is an example of his work. This is the programme cover, exhibition cover, and his picture here of Paula was on the cover of the catalogue. And I've got the original photograph here that he used. I put a red square around it, and as you can see, he's been quite selective as to what he's used in this picture. He's used charcoal, he's used a textured paper, you can see the texture there. He's reduced the number of shelves here on the left, and he's changed the area here on the right, put a picture in but kept the window frame. And this is sort of an icing glove resting on something, and he's moved that more into the picture. So it's interesting seeing them side by side. And beautiful work on the decoration, very fine detail he's managed to create. With charcoal you do get this very strong black and white. A second painting I remember distinctly was this oil on canvas of Pinky at the Coppers, and this is an oil painting, and he's taken this hanging crane device as a feature for his picture, which we'll see in another work of his a bit later on. So the question was, what happened to the artwork some 40 years later, almost 30 years later? Well, the paintings, the collection of paintings he did were bought by Cooplands bakery, and they kept most of them, and surprisingly they came up for auction very recently, and he was able to buy them back. So because Cooplands went into liquidation in 2015, he got Alan got a phone call from the auctioneer also in West Yorkshire, bought them back whilst he was on honeymoon, he tells me. He reframed them in 2019, and then they were displayed at the art gallery in Whitehaven, and if I'd known, I would have gone to see them. So that's quite an interesting story there. And these were the artworks that he bought most of them back, and these are the ones that I remember from the exhibition. There's Paula, there was this one here, there was this one here. I think there was probably this one here and maybe another that were on display. And you can see these now on Alan's website. Alan stated, I really benefited from the restriction of responding for a year to the workings of that small industry. After I'd finished, I gave myself a new industry challenge, but closer to home, hill farming in the northern Pennines. So, right, so we now go on to pharmaceuticals, and there's a painting here commissioned by the National Science Museum. Dista Products, Liverpool Invented, produced Human Insulin using genetically modified bacteria in 1982. And this is a really early date for this type of work. And the artist here is Alan Stones. And it's a fantastically complicated painting to create, done in oil, large scale. And what's interesting here is you've got the reflection of the scientist lady here in the glass, in the perspex or whatever's protecting this fermenter. So just looking at the science, it's quite interesting that the first protein to be sequenced was also insulin, and that was done by Fred Sanger in the Cavendish Laboratory in Cambridge, and he gets the Nobel Prize for Chemistry for that work. And so it's also the first protein to be produced in this recombinant DNA technology way. So on the right we have insulin, looking at the structure here, and to get the sequence you had to sequence these two chains. There's an alpha and beta chain of different lengths of amino acids. And so it's just useful to think what's actually going on inside here. We've got bacteria with altered DNA producing insulin, and this is just a modern diagrammatic representation of insulin. And this also has this painting also has a significance today because of the COVID vaccine. COVID vaccines would potentially be produced in fermenters, something like this. So it just takes on another dimension because of the current situation we're in. Alan Stone's website shown here. This is a drawing on the website, sort of post-industrial view. Not sure if it's from a photograph or from imagination, probably imagination, inspired by a photograph of a sort of post-industrial age, done in graphite and pencil. Artists need classes, and I'm to describe here. I normally don't paint alone, and these are a couple of drawings I did, 1.5 each in an evening class. And what these are A4 sides, just in pencil. There's no background involved, and if you finish early in an art class, you often get told by the teacher tutor just to put in the background, and that sort of fills in the rest of the available time. What I hadn't realized is how long it takes to put backgrounds in. It's useful to have a project. I'll come back to drawing, painting later. And I found myself back in the 80s being invited to a fundraising event at Hopeton House, which was sponsored by the award scheme, Juniper's award scheme. I was a gold award holder, and I was sort of representing gold award holders. And there was a meal in the building here, this part of the dining hall of Hopeton House. And I found myself sitting at a circular table sponsored by the Tunnock family. And so one of my questions during the course of the evening was, could I visit Tunnock's factory to go and take some photographs? Tunnock's are Tunnock's are a well-known bakery firm based in Uddingston, and probably like Scottish royalty in many ways. It's part of the Scottish culture in a similar way to Billy Connolly is. So I was delighted to get this envelope coming through the post, very decorative envelope, saying you're very welcome to visit. And we've got this decorative note paper here, which is a bit unusual. So off I went on the 10th of September 1986. This was Boyd Tunnock's business card showing that they were trading with the Chinese and selling a lot to China. So off I went and took my camera. So initially I arrived about lunchtime, and they then insisted that I went out for lunch. So we got in Boyd's Tunnock's Lagonda, drove out for a meal, came back. So the lunch hour was precisely 1 hour, I do remember that. And then I was given a short tour around the factory, and this is what I saw, the various ladies working at very modern equipment, very modern production lines. These are Swiss production lines, Swiss manufacturing systems, where you've got the caramel wafers coming off. And I decided I'd afterwards do a painting of this particular frame, and I made a start with that but didn't finish it. But what's quite interesting here is you've got the colour of the overall recorded and the colour of the walls, which I would not have remembered from that period of time with taking in black and white. So that was all quite interesting. I wasn't allowed to ground myself, so there are problems doing industrial artwork from photographs. Artists may not have taken the photograph. The original image may be poor, or you may need to retake it. The image may be small. The background may be complex, like the earlier image I showed you. There may be a lack of colour. Certainly, they're very dark, some of these industrial buildings. And there may be a lack of interest, not very exciting subjects to paint. So competitions, artists need competitions from time to time. I'm a volunteer at the National Museum of Scotland in the Science Technology section, and there was a competition. I think 3 weeks. I got an email 3 weeks to produce a piece of artwork if I wanted to for their competition, and this was January this year. I wandered round, I took this picture, and this was the graphite drawing I created after about 12 hours. And it's a picture I like because we've got here a Chinese student taking over the museum with his mobile phone, taking over the controls, and we've got robots taking over our lives. So it was really quite a contemporary piece of artwork. And now with the COVID, these robots are coming into their own use at King's Buildings, University of Edinburgh. These robots, there are a pair of them working, trying to answer the question, can you get reinfected with COVID a second time? And robots, more or less the same of these, are working 24 hours, 24/7, moving microtiter plates around. So the picture that won the competition was a sort of three-dimensional sort of woolly sheep. So I was a bit staggered, really. Here was me doing a serious piece of art, but I didn't even come close. But it's quite interesting. Backgrounds are quite difficult in graphite, and I got some sort of like brass rubbing effect by accident, which was quite effective, which was interesting. Right, exhibitions. So back. I happened to be watching the news, BBC Scotland, in October 1998, and it was announced that Tay Spinners Ltd in Dundee was closing. This is the mill here. This was the managing director, Ian McClellan, and this was the interviewee at the time. So I wrote to Ian and said, could I come round and take some photographs? Well, I think I was more or less forgotten about, but I did some 3 weeks later get an invitation to go up and make an appointment to go and take some photographs. So off I went with some colour black and white film, and then I created from this. I spent 3 years creating, reproducing these photographs from negatives, scanning them, making them into a digital format, and preparing for an exhibition which should have opened in April this year, but was cancelled because of or postponed because of the virus. So they're in black and white and they're in colour. So hopefully this exhibition will take place at some point. This picture on the left of Douglas is quite interesting because it sort of symbolises the end of the jute industry, and here he is tipping out the last piece of jute from this bin into this collection bin. There's perhaps a little bit of disgust on his face that he was losing his job. Unfortunately, there's not much colour in a jute mill, but fortunately we've got a red bin, we've got a green bin, and he's put on this quite smart shirt, so it makes quite a good composition for a painting, which you'll see in a moment. Ruby here, I didn't ask her to pose like this. I asked if I could take a photograph, and she held up the spools like this, so it made quite a sort of delightful image, and really she's sort of standing up and sort of showing with pride the tools of her trade. You can see the clippers just in here for clipping the jute. So please come and see the exhibition when it takes place. So I decided to do a bit of artwork for this. This is a couple of silkscreen prints I did at Dundee City Arts, 6 hours work. This was 2-colour process, 3-colour process. So after that short space of time, I was happy with the artwork there. It was a good experiment. I then went on to do a drawing, and this took something like, of Ruby, so this took something like 100 hours, and then it's had a bit of a boost, COVID boost, so I darkened the background a bit, spent a bit more time, done 1 or 2 workshops online, and now after 120 hours, that's the result. Lockdown started 23rd of March, and this is the lawn market, and this is the grass market in Edinburgh. All the pubs are closed here, quite an astonishing sight. Then switched to doing some portraits for heroes. This is a project organised by Tom Croft, whereby a care worker or a member of the NHS would send you a photograph through Instagram, and then you had the challenge of painting that. And I managed to paint this in acrylics on paper in 17 days. So I'm running out of time. There's again a difficult background to adjust, and then we've had to switch around the label here. So managed that. She liked to lean to the right, so I had to just do that for her. I did a second artwork of Fiona the GP, shown here. She didn't really ask for a photograph of head and shoulders, but she sent me a full body photograph and didn't really think about the background or the distortion. But that was the artwork I completed for her. And this now appears in Google Arts and Culture, paintings in hospital section. That was done in 20 days. And it also appears, amongst others, in the BMJ last week. It appeared. So I then went to looking at doing some Tay Spinners artwork. And so I took this original photograph, areas to consider here. So I did a sketch initially, and then I started working on the portrait, the picture, and then I had to decide about how to do the background here, and I decided it needed a 2-point perspective. I had to read up all about perspective. If I used a 1-point perspective, then the image projected too much in front. I wanted to flatten the background a bit, and so that's why we've got these bits of tape here, and then I had to sort of match the sides so they looked appropriate. And then I blew the image of his face up on my computer screen, had a look, and discovered his eyes were open, and he had an earplug, so I then had to incorporate that, and it's really quite tricky to do these tiny slits. And so these are the various stages. So after about 39 days, not painting every day, I had a picture of Douglas here on the right with his eyes open and with an earplug. I was very grateful he'd put this smart shirt on because it made it a little bit more easier to paint. So to sort of summarize the time scale involved here, it took me 8 hours to do a silkscreen print, which I was happy with. The acrylic painting took between 40 and 90 hours, and I was then happy with that. The graphite drawing took much longer. So that was really quite interesting to discover that. It's much harder to put in a background in the graphite. Graphite's much better for quick sketches and things. And in exhibitions, you tend not to see very many detailed drawings. They tend to be more paintings that people prefer doing when they're dealing with portraits. And so it's important to exhibit, donate, sell, move art on. Otherwise, it accumulates. And I know one artist, I asked her what she did with her old artwork that didn't sell, and she said she just tore it up. So it's important to move it on or have a reason for doing the work. I would like to acknowledge Alan Stones, the Tunnock family, Tom Croft, Tay Spinners and Verdant Works Museum. I invite you all to come to this exhibition when it opens. I commend that to you. Please keep an eye on the Verdant Works website. It will appear perhaps in 9 months' time or something when we're over this current COVID infection period. And just finally, I've just completed this last one. Again, taken me about 40 days, 90 hours work. And this is Jim the Spinner. And I decided I would do a complex background, just see, because I had the time, I thought I'd have a go at that. I'm not painting every day, but and so that's the final result. I think I'm happy with that. You can spend more and more time, and the more time you spend, you refine the background more and more. And but I wanted to keep it reasonably loose. Different parts of the body are difficult to do in different paintings. The shirt here was far more difficult because of the even colour. It's much easier in the blue shirt that Douglas had. So I think I'm just about out of time. So thank you for listening. And there might be 1 or 2 questions. Thank you very much. Bye bye.